So for the second half of this section about ellipses, we're going to focus on the ones now that aren't centered at 0, 0. So the last section, you had just your x squared over a number, y squared over a number. If they're not centered at the origin, so they're not at 0, 0 anymore, they're centered very similar to circles. It's represented by h, comma, k, where h and k represent the x and the y value of your center. Okay, so when we talk about these not being centered at 0, 0, that just means that it's been moved somewhere else on the graph. So it's been moved left, right, up, or down. Now, pretty much everything that we did for the first half of this ellipsis section is the same. So like we're still going to be finding our C value the same way, writing our like vertices and co-vertices and foci, very similar to what we did before, but we then have to just change a little bit because our center has changed. Still, to like kind of keep note is that A is still going to be the bigger of the two numbers. So whichever number on the bottom of the fraction is larger, that's going to still tell you where your A value is at. Now this is another chart here that goes over kind of the different major axes that you can have depending on where the A value is at. So if you still have your formula sheet that I gave you guys on Friday, this would be another chart to write down. I think it's on the back of that first page, where you then are able to fill out like what you need to use for these types of ellipses. So if you guys look, everything looks the same except the tops. Like you have x minus h, y minus k, y minus k, x minus h. So it just kind of is shifting the way that our center is going to look here. So when they start throwing in those numbers, this is like a circle was. Remember, circles were x minus h squared, y minus k squared equals your radius squared. So this is going similar to that, where you still have x minus h, y minus k. And those numbers, when you pull them out, that's going to tell you where the center would be. Remember, we also have to think kind of opposite signs, because I know that we see minus signs there, but that really means that there was a positive number put in for the center. If you see a plus sign, that tells you then that you put in a negative, because then we did like our keep, change rule, and we changed those double negatives to positive signs. Again, make sure that you change this in your chart. This should say a squared minus b squared. We had that similar typo in the last section too, so just make sure that you change that for yourself. So we find c squared the same way. We're going to take a minus b, a squared minus b squared. We'll have to square root that number to get just our regular c. And then if you look at your vertices, co-vertices, and your foci, when you're dealing with a specific x or y value, depending on if you're on the left side or the right side of the chart, you will have to take that new center into consideration. So for example, if my a squared value is the largest and there's the x above it, to find my vertices, I'm going to do the h portion of my center plus or minus my a value, and then the k. For my co-vertices, it would be your h by itself, then your k portion of your center plus or minus your b, and then your foci is the h plus or minus c, and then k. So again, you'll just want to make sure that you can identify which side of the chart we're using so that it can kind of guide you in how you find all of these things. So let's do a couple examples here together. Starting with this first one, we have x plus 2 squared over 9, and then y minus 1 squared over 36. So remember, the larger number is your a. So if you look at these two, 9 and 36, 36 is the bigger number. That means that 36 is your a squared value. Okay, so a squared is equal to 36. So what does that mean a is going to be? Good, 6. So plus or minus 6. Now my b squared value is 9. So what's b going to be? Good, 3. Plus or minus 3. Okay, I'm going to find c squared really quick. So I'm going to do my a squared minus b squared. So that would be 36 minus 9, which is 27. And then we're going to square root that to find c. The square root of 27, so we'll have to round. It's about 5.2, so plus or minus 5.2. All right, so let's talk about the center now because it's no longer 0, 0. So for my center, I need to look at the top portion here because it's affecting the x and the y value. So it says x plus 2 and y minus 1. Remember I said when you pull the numbers, so we're looking at the 2 and the 1 there. When we pull them, we have to think about the opposite sign. So because it says x plus 2, that meant that it really started as a negative 2 because they all go x minus your center. So this was x minus a negative 2, and that's why we got a plus sign because we had those double negatives. So the center is going to be at negative 2, and then since it stays y minus 1, we just pull 1. So that's very much the same thing as what we did with circles. So my center is at negative 2, 1. Now, for my vertices, I'm using the left-hand side of my chart. So the vertices up above here says that we do our h from our center plus or minus the a, and then k. So coming down here, my h is that negative 2. We're going to do negative 2 plus or minus my a value, which was 6. And then my k, which was 1. So negative 2 plus 6 is going to be negative, or positive 4, and then 1. And then negative 2 minus 6 is going to be negative 8, and then 1. Oh, you know what? I'm looking at the wrong side of the chart. We got to switch this. Sorry, that's my mistake. I was looking at the wrong side. It's actually, major axis is vertical because the a squared value above it has the y. So we want to use the left-hand side of the chart. So, I'm sorry, the right-hand side of the chart. So up here, we want to be focused on this part. All right, so that's just going to change our vertices just a little bit. We're not going to do anything with the h value. We're just going to leave it negative 2 instead. We're going to do 1 plus or minus 6. So that's going to be negative 2. 1 plus 6 would be 7. And then negative 2, 1 minus 6 would be negative 5. So those are going to be my vertices. Now, co-vertices, so looking at the right-hand side, it says that you do your h plus or minus your b value, and then k. So it's going to be negative 2 plus or minus the b is 3, and then our k is 1. So negative 2 plus 3 is going to be 1, so 1, 1. And then negative 2 minus 3, that's going to be negative 5, 1. And the last thing we need to state is our foci. So again, going back up to my chart, a foci says that you leave h as is, and then you do your k of your center plus or minus your c value. So we're going to leave negative 2 alone. Then we're going to do 1 plus or minus our c, which we found to be about 5.2. So again, just like on the ellipses that we did on Friday where you had the center at 0, 0, the vertices and the foci should be along the same axis. They should be really close to each other in you guys' graph. So it looks similar to our vertices up here where we didn't do anything to the negative 2, the x value, but we did have to kind of manipulate our y by adding and subtracting. So for our foci, we're going to get negative 2 and then 6.2. And negative 2, negative 4.2. And now we're going to graph. Okay, so vertices, we're at -2, 7, and -2, -5. And that's because my center is at -2, 1. Okay, so my center moved to the left and up 1 from 0, 0. So these are my vertices. So again, if you need to label them, you can. Co-vertices, we have -2, and then, no, sorry, 1 and 1, and -5 and 1. All right, so let's go ahead and sketch this ellipse in. And then let's do our foci. So like I said, those should be really close to your vertices. So you're going -2, we're going up 6.2. And then we're going down -4.2. Okay, let's turn the page over. Now this one looks a little bit different than the last one because it's not written in that ellipse form right off the bat. We had ones like this with our circles where we had to complete the square to get the equation of the circle so that we could pull our radius and pull our center. So we're going to do the same thing with this ellipse. We're going to rewrite this by using the completing the square process so that it looks like an equation of an ellipse again. So remember when we did this for circles, we put like our x values together. So I'm going to put the 4x squared and the -8x together. And then we did plus, we drew a blank. Then I'm going to do my y's together. So I have 9y squared and 36y. And then draw your second blank. Now remember with the -104, we need to move that over to the right side because we want to get any regular numbers over on the other side there. So we're going to add 104, and then we need to draw in 2 more blanks because whatever we fill in the blanks on the left side of my equal sign, I'm going to have to put it on the right side too, just to keep it balanced. Now before we do completing the square, what I'm going to do here is from this first section, so from these terms here, I'm actually just going to pull out a 4. Because 4 can go into the 4x squared and the -8x. So if I take a 4 out, it's going to say x squared minus 2x, and then our blank value there. And then from the second set, I'm going to go ahead and take out a 9. So then it would say y squared plus 4y, and then our blank again. And everything on the right side is going to stay the same for now. So now I'm looking at just like the inside piece of my parentheses as for me to use to complete my square. So I'm going to take this -2 times a half, which is going to be -1, and then we're going to square that. So -1 squared is +1. So that's what's going to go in one of the blanks on either side there at my equal sign. So in the second one, for the y, what are we going to do half of? 4. Half of 4 would be 2. What's 2 squared? Good, 4. So then 4 comes up here. All right, so then next thing that we did is we would rewrite this using that completing the square so that it was a binomial, had 2 terms. So I have 4 out front, and then it's going to be x. Remember I said that number always comes from what we took half of the middle term. So since we took half of negative 2, we got negative 1. This is going to factor to x minus 1 squared. And then we're going to have plus 9. The second one's going to say y plus 2 squared. And then over here I'm going to add. So 104 plus 1 plus 4. What I also need to do over here, since I took out a 4 and I took out a 9, I need to make sure that I take this times 4 and this times 9. Since I factored it out over here, I want to make sure that I account for that on the right side so that it's all fluid and it makes sense. So this would actually be 104 plus 4 plus 36. And that's equal to 144 when I add those. So we're getting really close to our ellipse form. What I need to do though, because my ellipse equations, I go back to that one that we saw up here. It said equals 1 right here. So I need to get this one to look that way. And to do that, I'm going to divide everything by 144. So then what happens here is I'm going to reduce like 4 over 144. So 4 can go into that 36 times. So I'm going to rewrite this as x minus 1 squared over 36. 9 can go into 144 16 times. So I can reduce this one as well. So it's going to say y plus 2 squared over 16. And then equals 1. So now I'm in my ellipse form. So what I'm going to do now is figure out what part of my chart I need to use so I can find my center, my co-vertices, my vertices, my foci, all that stuff. All right, so if I look here, 36 would be the a squared value, because that's the bigger number, which means that my b squared would be my 16. Okay, now 36 has the x above it, so that means that we're going to use the left-hand side of our chart. So if you go back to that previous page, you're using everything on the left-hand side to help you find your center, your vertices, your co-vertices, and all of that. Okay, so if you guys look at just the top portion here, that's going to help you guys find your center. So let's go ahead and finish this out. What's my a value going to be if a squared is 36? What's the square root of 36? 6. What's the square root of 16? 4. So there's your a and there's your b. Now to find c, we're going to take a squared minus b squared. So 36 minus 16, which is 20. So if we square root 20, I'm pretty sure it's about 4.5. Yes, you get 4.47, so I'm going to round it up to 4.5. Okay, so now let's write out our center and all of that stuff that we need so we can graph this. Okay, what is your center for this graph if you look at just the top portion here? Make sure you pull the opposite sign than what you see. So what do you guys think? What's the center? Good. 1, -2. Now vertices. Again, I'm using the left-hand side of my chart. So vertices, that's when you take your h value, so the 1, and you do plus or minus your a and then your k. So we're going to do 1 plus or minus the 6, and then we're going to leave -2 alone. So my vertices are going to say 7, -2, and then -5, -2. Co-vertices are next. This is when you leave your h value alone, so that would be the 1. And then we take our k, so our -2, and we do plus or minus our b value, which is 4. So it's going to be 1, and then negative 2 plus 4 would be 2. Negative 2 minus 4 would be negative 6. So 1, negative 6 is the other covertice. Last is foci. So this is when you take your h value, so the 1, you do plus or minus your c, which is 4.5, and then your y value of the center, so that would be negative 2. So we get 5.5, negative 2, and then negative 3.5, negative 2. Now I'm going to graph that information that I found there. All right, so my center is at 1, negative 2. So there's the center of my ellipse. Vertices, we have 7, negative 2, and negative 5, negative 2. Oh, I graphed my center wrong. I went negative 1, negative 2. Should be there instead. That looks more in the middle. Okay, now my co-vertices, we have 1, positive 2, 1, negative 6. All right, so let's go ahead and sketch that ellipsid. Last thing to do here is our foci. So we're going to go 5.5, and then down 2, so about there. So there's one of them, and then negative 3.5, and down 2. So there's the other one.